The main reason a sprinkler system fails is because the water control valve is closed. The most dependable way to know if a control valve is open or closed is to electrically supervise the valve with a supervisory or tamper switch. The tamper switch will trigger a supervisory signal that the water control valve is closed or moved to the off normal position. In this module, we will be reviewing the most common types of water control valves and how they operate, the appropriate Potter supervisory switch for these water control valves, and proper installation of the Potter supervisory switches. There are four main types of water control valves: outside screw and yoke, or OS and Y valves, wall post and post indicator, or PIV valves, butterfly valves, and ball valves. The OS and Y valve is a large hand wheel with a threaded stem or screw running through the center. The stem is attached to the gate of the valve. The stem moves in and out of the valve body through the yoke. When the valve is open, the stem or screw protrudes through the hand wheel, giving a visual indication that the valve is open. As the valve closes, the stem screws into the body of the valve. Wall post and post indicators operate non-rising stem valves. Both have indicating windows that show if the valve is open or closed. The wall-mounted PIV has a hand wheel to open and close the valve, while the yard post PIV requires a wrench to open and close the valve. Butterfly valves are often used as main control or zone valves and also use a hand wheel to open and close. Butterfly valves also have an indicator or flag to indicate if the valve is open or closed. Ball valves may be used only on the alarm line of the sprinkler system to allow for maintenance of the retard chamber pressure switch or water motor gong. Ball valves may also be used as control valves if acceptable to the local authority having jurisdiction. Ball valves open and close simply by moving the handle 1/4 turn to an open or closed position. Ball valves used on alarm line trim for wet, dry, and deluge systems must be electrically supervised. Locking, sealing, and removing the handle does not meet the intent of NFPA 72. The most frequently used Potter supervisory switches are the outside screw and yoke valve supervisory switches, or OSY, SU-1 and -2. The post indicator control valve supervisory switch, or PCVS-1 and -2. The retrofit ball valve switch, or RBVS, and the plug type supervisory switch, or PTS-C. These Potter supervisory switches have a NEMA rating of 6P. They can be mounted in any position and include the factory installed neoprene gasket. 2 conduit openings are available on both the OSY-SU and the PCVS switches. Trip rods are scored with snap lines to allow for easy length adjustment. As the name suggests, the Potter OSY-SU-1 and -2 supervisory switches are used on OS and Y water control valves. The OSY-SU-1 features a single pole double throw contact, while the OSY-SU-2 includes 2 single pole double throw contacts. The OSY-SU tamper switch mounts on the yoke of the valve using a mounting bracket and carriage bolts. This tamper switch has a trip rod that sits down in a 1/8 inch groove in the valve stem. As the valve closes, the trip rod rises out of the groove and trips the switch. This should happen within the first 2 revolutions of the hand wheel. The Potter PCVS-1 single contact or PCVS-2 double contact Tamper switches are used on both the yard post or wall mount PIVs. The PCVS screws into a 1/2-inch NPT fitting on the side of the PIV. The switch has a trip rod that sits on the valve target. The target is the part of the valve that indicates whether the valve is open or closed. When the valve is fully open, the target is pushing the trip rod against the spring force of the rod. As the target moves up or down, closing the valve, the trip rod follows the target and trips the switch. The switch should trip within 2 revolutions of the valve or hand wheel. The butterfly water control valve also uses the Potter PCVS and screws into a 1/2-inch NPT fitting on the valve. The trip rod is operated by a cam in the valve that rotates when the valve is closed. When the valve is fully open, the cam is pushing against the trip rod. As the valve is closed, the cam moves away from the rod and the switch trips. If a supervisory switch needs to be installed on a ball valve, the Potter RBVS is the appropriate switch. The RBVS mounts on and monitors valves ranging in size from 1/2 to 2 inches. The RBVS detects changes in movement of the ball valve handle. It can be mounted in any position and is perfect for monitoring valves on backflow preventers as well. The PTS-C is used on special water control valves that have a non-rising stem. These switches are UL listed for special applications and are subject to the approval of the authority having jurisdiction. As with all Potter product installations, there are a couple of guiding principles that need to be followed to ensure precision installation and optimal performance of the Tamper switch. First, read and follow all instructions included with the Tamper switch. Second, always use the correct tool for the job. OSY-SU supervisory switches must be installed so that if someone attempts to remove it from the valve, the switch will trip. To accomplish this, the switch has 2 positions that will activate it. One position is for valve closure, while the other is for switch removal. You can easily test these situations at the time the switch is installed. First, set the trip rod in its normal position, perpendicular to the base, with the valve in a fully open position. Now, close the valve enough to operate the switch. Grab the trip rod and raise it higher. If the switches trip again, the device is not installed correctly. To correct this problem, move the switch body closer to the center of the valve. The PCVS is used on yard and wall mount PIVs and butterfly control valves. To install the PCVS on a PIV, you will need to see if the valve is pre-drilled. If the valve is not pre-drilled, you can drill and tap the valve. Or, if there are 2 windows on the PIV and it meets local code requirements, one of the windows can be removed and the PCVS can be installed on a steel plate in place of one of the windows. To install the PCVS housing, begin by opening and then partially closing the valve to determine the direction that the target assembly moves, and then position the valve to the fully open position. Next, loosen the socket head screw and remove the nipple. Screw the nipple into the 1/2-inch NPT hole and tighten the lock nut against the valve housing to secure the nipple firmly in place. Now, using a scale or probe, measure the distance from the open end of the nipple to the target assembly and subtract 1/2 inch from the measurement. Loosen the cover screws and remove the cover from the PCVS. Then loosen the locking screw that holds the trip rod in place and adjust the rod length to match the length you just measured. Then retighten the locking screws. If the trip rod is too long, using a pair of pliers, snap off a 1-inch segment of the pre-scored rod and reinstall it. Now, partially close the valve and slide the PCVS unit as far as possible onto the nipple, noting which direction the rod moves when the valve is closed. Position the device so that the switches will actuate when the valve is open, and tighten the socket head screw in the collar. To test the switch, carefully open the valve to the fully open position. As the target moves, it should engage the trip rod and activate the switches. When the installation is complete, return the valve to its fully open position. On the butterfly valve, the PCVS is installed through a pipe plug on the side of the valve. To install the PCVS on the butterfly valve, begin by removing the nipple from the PCVS and attach it to the valve. Loosen the set screw that holds the trip rod in place and extend the rod. Now partially close the valve and slide the switch over the nipple. The trip rod will hit the cam of the valve and adjust itself to the proper length. Next, remove the switch housing and push the trip rod in another fraction of an inch. This will prevent the rod from binding due to any imperfection on the cam. Now, tighten the set screw that holds the trip rod in place. Slide the switch unit back over the nipple, making sure that it is oriented so the cam will push against the trip rod when the valve is fully open. Then, tighten the set screw that holds the nipple in place. To install a PTS-C supervisory switch, a receptacle is mounted on a wall or section of pipe. A plug with a length of cable is plugged into the receptacle and looped through the hand wheel of the valve or through a hole drilled into the handle of the valve, and then hardwired back into the receptacle. When the valve is closed, it unplugs the plug from the receptacle and trips the switch. The cable must be stretched tight enough so that the operation of the valve will cause the plug to pull out of the receptacle. This concludes Module 4 of the Potter Sprinkler Monitoring Product Training Program. In this module, we reviewed the most common types of water control valves and how they operate, the appropriate Potter supervisory switch for these water control valves, and proper installation of the Potter supervisory switches. If you have questions about a product or application and can't find the answer in the instructions, please call Potter Electric at 800-325-3936.